Um, so in this lecture, I'm going to talk about networked virtual spaces, which is more recently commonly known as the metaverse. Um, and put a link to these notes in the Discord if you guys want to take a look. And so I'm just going to show some examples and talk a little bit about the history of networked virtual spaces. Um, the way that it'll become more obvious, I think, when I get to the end, where the relationship between this topic and the VR topic that we've been working on in class. Um, but essentially, one of the main applications of VR that is driving and is going to drive adoption and uh, you know design and innovation in the future is using VR to create to sort of connect to networked virtual. So we're not going to be creating networked experiences. That's takes a lot of extra work and setup that we won't go into. But we are going to be creating virtual spaces that can be accessed in VR. And so we can look at these examples for inspiration. And we could also design the scenes that we're creating. As usual, the content of the scenes is something that I leave up to you guys. But you could take inspiration from these and design scenes that might exist in a networked context as sort of a, design concept or proof of concept. Um, just a little bit of history. Networked games are really the kind of like main precedent for this. The first networked games were text-based games called MUDs or multi-user dungeon games. And the popularity of these games were very popular in the 70s and 80s and 90s until they were graphics-based MUDs and later MMORPGs or massively multiplayer online role-playing games that use 2D and 3D graphics. And in both of these cases, what makes these games different from local multiplayer or single player games is the social aspect of networked games. That's something that we're very used to today with social media. But when these games were first being created, this was a form of interaction that pretty much didn't exist elsewhere in the real world outside of like, posting letters in newspapers or things like that, physical social forums. So a big part of the development of this genre has to do with the way that the text, the main component or the main game, the design of that game, interacts with what is called the meta text, or sometimes the paratext, or the things that happen outside of the game, the interactions that users have about the game, things that are written about the game, and those things tend to influence each other. So this video, I'm just going to show a little bit at the beginning. Talks about the origin of MUDs, which are sort of the precedent for MMO style games.
Reginald Rusty Rutherford wrote The Dungeon, a dungeon crawler emulating the rules of original edition Dungeons & Dragons. Rutherford's game was coded for the Plato Computer-Assisted Instruction System, a national network of educational terminals based at the University of Illinois. Plato was not the internet. The internet didn't exist yet, but the nature of the system allowed anyone with access to a terminal to access content made at other terminals across the university and at other campuses. Like many other games created at the time, the dungeon was considered contraband, and if discovered would likely be deleted by system administrators. So to conceal its presence, Rutherford inserted it as the fifth program in the population and energy group of the Plato file system, giving it the name we know today, PDIT 5. Pete 5 was a pioneering role-playing game with rich top-down vector graphics the likes of which wouldn't be surpassed until the 1980s. It saw the player travel as a solitary, randomly rolled warrior, navigating a 900-room dungeon populated with randomly placed enemies straight out of the monster manual. Players aimed to amass at least 20,000 experience points and as much treasure as possible before making it out of the dungeon alive to retire with honor and place in the Hall of Fame's top 10 scores. Pete 5 was wildly popular with university students, and inspired numerous imitators that very same year, including D&D, Dungeon, and a multiplayer variant, Orthanc. Pete 5 was supposed to have been a multiplayer game from the beginning, but the dungeon was repeatedly deleted upon discovery, which stalled development. So, inspired by the game's deletion, Paul Resch, Larry Kemp, and Eric Hagstrom collaborated to create Orthanc as a multiplayer dungeon crawler directly inspired by Pete 5. Orthanc allowed for tens of thousands of users, each with their own characters, and the number of active users was only restricted by the number of active Plato terminals the game could be accessed from, which by 1975 was about 1,000 individual screens and keyboards. The Orthanc dungeon went 10 floors deep, and while players couldn't ally with one another in parties, they could stop to chat, work together to take down monsters, or even kill one another and steal their inventory. Resch, Kemp, and Hagstrom couldn't have known it then, but they had created a template that would one day connect millions of people around the Earth. A multiplayer online role-playing game, or MORPG. And while player killing was fairly common, many players would simply hang out in the dungeon together chatting rather than actually playing, even though they could do that anywhere on Plato. They chose Orthanc as their place to chat because it was a familiar environment, not unlike how players of later online games would stand around shooting the breeze instead of raiding or going on quests together. Other Plato-based MMORPGs like Moria and Oubliette would innovate upon Orthanc's concepts with
So yeah, I want to pause there just to kind of reiterate what we just heard in the video, talking about how players within the context of the game would do non-game activities, just socializing and hanging out, even though they could be doing the same thing in other parts of the network as themselves. There's something about being inside the game world that is compelling, even if you're not approaching the goals of the game. So I'm going to show a couple more examples of these networked games before we get to more modern stuff.
Enter the world of Ultima Online. It's more than a fantasy, because it really exists. It's more than a game, because it never ends. And it's a giant leap beyond anything you've ever seen before. To begin, create your own character and choose your appearance. Play whatever role you want, from wizard to warrior, or bard to barkeep. We invite you, and several thousand of your closest friends, to live, quest, fight, love, or hate in a fully persistent world, where every action you take affects the lives of others. Who will you be? What will you do? Where will you travel? Ultima Online. Go beyond life as you know it, to an adventure more incredible than you can imagine. Ultima Online.
So the Ultima Online game was very popular MMO. This is one of the original ads from like 1996 or 1997. We'll look at World of Warcraft in a second. World of Warcraft is obviously the much more recognizable MMO, but Ultima Online sort of created a lot of the precedent for World of Warcraft. And again, just emphasizing in the ad what they're talking, the way that they sort of talk about what makes the game unique has to do with the social elements of creating a networked space. The idea that the game never ends because you can constantly create new goals and meet new people and have new interactions. It's not limited to just the levels of the game. And then this sort of idea of living in a fantasy world. So it's not just that you're in a game and experiencing a fictional world, but there's other people there as well. So it's even more of a immersive experience because you're interacting with other people, but you're all participating in this collective fiction. Eve Online is another very popular MMO with sort of very different parameters, and I think it's interesting to look at this, and then we're going to compare it to what we'll see towards the end in terms of the much more sort of like politically oriented representation of life.
To explain a game like Eve in 5 minutes seems like an impossible challenge. After all, I've been playing for over 7 years and I still don't understand many aspects of this game, and really that about sums it up. Eve is unlike any game there is. Well, first the nuts and bolts. Eve is a massive multiplayer online sandbox game where all gameplay takes place on a single server instance. In other words, unlike most other MMOs, all the thousands of players who are logged in share the same universe and can potentially interact with each other. Purely on the technical level, this is fairly difficult, and it does require a massively powerful and advanced server system. The setting is 21,000 years in the future in a distant star cluster called New Eden. Gameplay takes place in several thousand star systems within this cluster. Interstellar travel is possible through jump gates that link all of the systems together. It's also possible through wormholes or sometimes jump drives that are used only by huge capital ships. As far as we know, there are no aliens in Eve, just many factions of humans, only some of which would be hardly recognizable as such any longer. The players are called Capsuleers, which are specially selected humans who can link their consciousness into a starship. They pretty much become one with the ship, which gives them great advantages over a ship with the standard crew. Capsuleers are also virtually immortal. They always have at least one fresh clone available, so that if they die, their consciousness is transferred to the clone and they are resurrected. A lot like the Cylons on Battlestar Galactica. Many people sum up the game by calling it internet spaceships. There are literally hundreds of different ship classes that a Capsuleer could fly, depending on their clone skill levels and whether they can afford it. The ships range from small frigates to super capital ships, but also include transports, freighters, and mining barges. Players can also deploy massive space stations that have a number of different uses. Now, sandbox means there is no end game or way to win. You are free to define yourself or make your own goals, which may be to simply mine an asteroid belt and watch YouTube, or be an ambitious masochist and lead an alliance of thousands of players in an attempt to exert major influence over the player-driven universe. There is no other game that will make you feel emotionally the way Eve does. This has to do with three major commodities that drive and motivate everyone. The first is money and stuff. Making in-game ISK or money can be done in endless ways. Most are benign, like mining, missioning, and manufacturing, things that Care Bears do. A few are ruthless towards other players. Yes, all your money and materials, your sovereign space, can be stolen, looted, or bamboozled away. Unlike in other games, once those items are gone, they're gone for good. It's time to either cry, rage quit, move on, or get even. The second great commodity is time. It honestly does take a lot of time to train skills, accrue wealth, build things, mine things, as well as create and maintain a corporation or alliance if you're in that kind of role. This is not a game for the impatient that are seeking instant gratification, and all the time and effort you put into an in-game goal can be ruined in no time at all. Perhaps your fancy industrial ship is caught by people you're at war with and destroyed. Perhaps your station is assaulted. Maybe you were scammed out of a lot of stuff. Maybe your alliance or corp falls apart or is forced to retreat from their space, which leads to the third commodity. The third commodity is reputation. This comes from knowledge of the game or competence, leadership skills, notoriety, in-game fame, and several other things. I find in my own experience, well-known players struggle internally with their sense of reputation and pride more than how the community ultimately views them. When players feel their reputation is damaged, they often rage quit, demotivate, or abandon their lofty endgame goals to pursue other ones. These three elements, material wealth, time.
So I'll pause there, but I wanted to go through to see. So, in comparison to the other games that we've seen and what we'll see with more modern network spaces, what's interesting here is that there are no goals. There's no built-in quests or specific narrative storylines that players have to fulfill. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure, but it seems pretty, uh, yeah. And I think that's true in general with genre-related stuff, where they're probably borrowing from the same set of, consideration and conventions. Um, but again, with Eve, the goals that are created in the game come out of the social aspect. So the way that you interact with other players, your reputation, those are the things that create the goals and the stakes of the game itself. So then World of Warcraft obviously is probably the most recognizable, MMO. And for this, I just have a short clip. You guys have seen the Leroy Jenkins clip, right? Or maybe not. No, you guys haven't seen this? You've seen it. Yeah. Have you seen it? Okay, so that's good. So if you guys haven't seen it before, it's worth seeing. But even though it's a really funny clip, it also really captures an aspect of what's interesting about these spaces is, again, the social element of people collaborating together and how that changes the way that these spaces work.
Okay, guys, these eggs have given us a lot of trouble in the past. Does anybody need anything off this guy, or can we bypass him?
I think Leroy needs something from this guy.
Oh, he needs those devout shoulders? Isn't he a paladin?
Yeah, but that'll help him heal better. He'll have more mana.
Christ. Okay, well, what we'll do, I'll run in first, gather up all the eggs so we can kind of just, blast them all down with AoE. I will use Intimidating Shout to kind of scatter them so we don't have to fight a whole bunch of them at once. When my shout's done, I'll need Anthony to come in and drop his shout too, so we can keep them scattered and not to fight too many. When his is done, Bass, of course, will need to run in and do the same thing. We're going to need Divine Intervention on our mages, so they can AE, so we can, of course, get them down fast, because we're bringing all these guys. I mean, we'll be in trouble if we don't take them down quick. I think it's a pretty good plan. We should be able to pull it off this time. What do you think, Abdul? Can you give me a number crunch real quick?
Yeah, give me a sec. I'm coming up with 32.33, repeating, of course, percentage of survival.
Oh, that's a lot better than we usually do.
Alright, chums up.
Ready, guys?
Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins!
Oh my god, he just ran in. Save him!
Oh, gee, stick to the plan.
Oh Jesus, let's go.
Stick to the plan, Chubs.
Stick to the plan.
Oh gee, oh fuck.
Give me divine intervention.
Hurry up.
Shout.
He's saying I can't cast. I can't move. Am I lagging, guys?
I can't move. What the hell? I can't hear you. Oh my god.
The eggs keep spawning. More respawning.
I don't think you can cast with that shit. Oh my god. Shout.
We got him.
Take it off. I got it. Take it off.
Come on, stay down.
Oh my god.
God damn it, Leroy.
God damn it.
Leroy, you moron. Leroy.
Jimmy.
This is ridiculous.
I'm on it. Don't mash. I'm down, Fortune down. God damn it.
This is
I got killed before I could
we
remove
died
him.
on this. God. Oh,
See,
Spiffy res us.
Why do
Spiffy
you
res
do
us.
this shit, Leroy?
I'm trying.
It's not my fault.
Who's soul stoned?
We do have a soul stone up, don't we?
Anthony, do you got soul stones?
Warlock.
Oh god.
Oh, for...
Great job, guys.
Chums, we
For
wiped
Christ's
up.
sake. Leroy, you were just stupid as hell. Over
At least I have chicken.
So that's the Leroy Jenkins clip. It's, I think it's from like 2009, and it was uh, immediately like this really hugely viral clip. And I think it's interesting in terms of this reflecting on the way that these spaces work, is that it becomes this very important meta text. It's not part of the original text. It's not something that anybody ever designed, but because of the emergent design of the game and the space and the way that people interact in the space, can have these very funny or novel or different experiences and different outcomes. Okay, so all of these examples that we've looked at so far are games, and within games, there's always a goal. Games always have goals that you're working towards, and they have obstacles and rewards. In some cases, the goals are defined by the players, like EVE Online. In some cases, the goals are defined by the developers, like World of Warcraft has quests. So even though you're working with other people and determining your own strategy, the designers are ultimately the people who shape the overall narrative of the game. These games still introduce this social element to the game. So they introduce this social part of the game where you interact with other people, and this leads to texts outside of the game. This leads to interactions and stories that exist outside of the game world and become part of the real world. In this clip, this is from 2009. But this is from a program called Second Life, which was originally introduced in 2003. And Second Life was the first networked space that didn't have a game element. There's no designed space. Users are completely in charge of everything that they create and all of the goals that they set from themselves. And so in this video, this is a conversation between a digital media artist and a curator, talking about making work within this platform. And so there's some interesting stuff in here. We'll just watch a little bit of this because it's pretty long. But we'll watch a little bit of this. But we can see the difference here is that this isn't a fictional world designed by somebody and then allowing other people to populate it. This is just a completely open virtual space that people can do, can create their own avatar, create their own spaces, and can really do whatever they want within the space.
Hey, Kool-Aid Man.
Hi, Nicholas. So you want to go sit down and chat somewhere?
Yeah. Do you know of a good place?
Yeah, I know a few places.
All right. So the first question of the interview is discussing this question about kind of your history and your kind of art education, I guess you could say, but also your kind of the early part of your career, which is like invested in cinema and film history. And I'm wondering how that kind of education or that fascination or that interest or that part of your kind of early part of your career has like spilled over into kind of more recent work.
Well, originally, I wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to tell stories. I studied literature and philosophy and film in preparation for what I thought would be a career in cinema. When I'm surfing for Google Street Views or, let's say, exploring Second Life, the narrative impulse is always there. An underlying theme or goal is a constant search for artistic tools and methods that best represent or reveal modern experience. So I look for ideas and inspiration from those who also struggle to represent, their experience of modernity, whatever the time period or era. In fact, I believe that the different generations or time periods that have been termed modern are more similar than different. I mean, be it Chaucer or Cory Archangel, the artist has searched for how to represent and critically examine the present.
Oftentimes one can approach your work or look at your work.
So this video is long and there's a lot of really good stuff in here. And I recommend watching the rest of it, but just want to use it as an example of this world where, part of the reason they put the interview in here is because they're in this space that has been created by other people. And what they're talking about is the way that modern life is represented in these digital spaces and how that can be reflected in creating art. Um, and so it's interesting. They're just using these spaces that are designed by other people. The people just created them just for the sake of creating them, just to make the space and just because they could. There's no specific goal behind them. There may be, in Second Life, there are these economies that emerge. So you could create spaces and sell them and things like that. But for the most part, it's like a closed system. It exists only, for its own development. So again, Second Life is the first networked virtual space that doesn't have a gameplay element as its main focus. It's more of it's called a sandbox where it resembles the real world, but people can do whatever they want. And this leads to lots of different types of online communities, some of which represent things in the real world, like real estate and art galleries and performances, and other things obviously are things that only can exist in a virtual world. And Second Life is also the first time the first thing that gets applied the term metaverse in a widely sort of used way. Even though metaverse has been used to describe lots of other things over the years, it's the first thing that feels like this completely closed virtual representation of life. So of course, a new example of the metaverse was introduced in the pandemic in 2020. Even though a lot of the technologies that became very common existed already, there was this period of time where everybody was suddenly online and interacting in platforms like Zoom and Discord, and people were sort of suddenly thrown into this aspect of, what we can call the metaverse, of having these virtual networked experiences. So there's a lot of software that came out of this, some of which we're almost to actually getting to VR. But a good example, Gather.town, is a networked virtual space that uses 2D graphics along with video and audio to recreate the experiences of occupying a physical space on the internet. And they have an interesting approach. So look at this and then a couple other things.
Hi, I used to be like you. After a year of working with my employees over video calls, I realized that something was missing. We missed having a place to work instead of just working from our places. That's how we ended up in a Gather office. Let me show you around. It's easy to share something with anyone in your space, a website, a calendar, a note, or the soundtrack to this video.
Hey Sam, are you gonna be at game night later?
Oh, I'll be there. Running into people like that is what makes interactions feel so much more natural on Gather. I have a 2 p.m. meeting with Jeff, and I love that I can see him making his way over.
Hey, what's this meeting about?
Just showing how a Gather office allows us to feel more present during the workday.
Sure beats video calls.
Hey, while I've got you, can you show us your custom workspace?
Definitely.
I just hit the follow button, and now Jeff is leading the way. This makes it easier to have a conversation while you're moving around. Whoa, is that a moat?
It's a koi pond. Never could have this at our old office.
That's the beauty of a Gather office. It can look like this, or even this. Choosing your style is as easy as that.
Do you want to join an actual meeting?
Sure. These private spaces are great for meetings. We can have a larger conversation without disturbing anyone else in the office. Looks like Mary is working in another window, so Gather automatically mutes her mic and camera. Let's give her a ring.
Hey Sam, I was just wrapping up this presentation. Check it out.
Wow, it's a great idea. I love it. You know what else I love? not sitting in traffic, not paying rent, not being limited to hiring people based on location. Bill, where are you working from again?
I'm on a boat.
I love that I can host a company game night on the rooftop. Let me step onto the spotlight tile so everyone can hear this last part. Hi everyone, I just wanted to end the video by letting you all know how much I missed this. The camaraderie, the collaboration, the sense of community. I realized that I missed the company of my company. And if you don't have a Gather office yet, come see what you're missing. We'll have you in your own space in 30 seconds when you visit gather.town.
So, this is just a promotional video, but it does a good job of covering kind of the basic idea of a platform like this, which is essentially creating a virtual version of, real life in the way that we experience it. And this is the type of thing that kind of existed that was created out of need created by the pandemic. This is something that I started exploring, during the first semester during the pandemic when we wanted to have our yearly, we have like a end of the year gathering with students and faculty in the department, and we wanted to do something that was not just going to be people sitting around in a Zoom. And so we looked at this platform and other platforms that allow you to do this type of thing. And so there's this sort of game version of this, but then there's also the real life version of it. Okay, so then VR has been sort of added on to these types of platforms. So these platforms don't have to use VR, as we've seen, but VR adds this level of immersiveness where people can share a space that they can actually, have a physical presence in a 3D sense. So another one of these platforms that uses VR but also works on 2D screens is Mozilla Hubs.
Inside a shared virtual space using Hubs. Teach a class, host a conference, collaborate with your team, or just hang out.
So this is kind of the same pitch, so we can just watch this. But one of the things now, so we're looking at a VR version of this, and one of the things you'll notice is the style of this is a little bit different. Because again, these VR experiences are very processor heavy. All of the graphics are very simplified. Although there's some like lighting and stuff in that one, which is kind of nice. But the avatars are very simple. We'll see in the Facebook version of this in a second that people generally don't have legs. They kind of like stave in places where it's not going to be as useful. So there's a lot of constraints still with the way that these platforms work. So that's just showing like the design tools and stuff like that. So more recently, we've seen Microsoft has a VR thing inside of its Teams. We have Facebook Horizons, and there's other platforms that are doing this. This is a news article about, or a news video about the Facebook setup. And this, again, we can pay attention to the design of the space, the way that the graphics look, and then what people can do inside of these platforms.
Zuckerberg. We talked about the future of work. There are apps like this. Spatial has something like this that I've tried in the past year.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit.
Another I could work on. I was working in Slack. I was doing Google Docs stuff while I was attending the meeting, which was crazy. That's the thing about VR right now is you put on the headset and then you're trapped in this world where you can't get back to your other devices. If you're diving into this virtual universe, why can't you take your other tech tools with you? The other thing you can do in Horizon Workrooms is draw on a whiteboard. There's a really clever trick where your controller can flip around and become a marker in the world. So if I write on my actual desk, it turns into a drawing that I can then post onto the whiteboard. And even the table that you're sitting at can change.
They don't have legs.
We were all sitting at this
the animations are pretty glitchy because it's trying to animate the people in space through sensors as well as through default animations. And then the spaces are all designed to basically be these kind of like different efficient versions of an office type space. They're organizing people in different ways. So obviously you can put people in any orientation and position that you want. But then they're also creating these devices. So a lot of it is they have versions of your keyboard and versions of different things in the real world, so that you can do work in this setting.
The second area is around collaboration, which is really what this is.
So there's a lot more in here, but it's just interesting to think about how these technologies are being used and what's kind of like driving their adoption. So we still haven't really gotten to this point that a lot of people are predicting or preparing for, where we're all sitting in our bedrooms in a VR helmet doing work all day. But that is sort of, whether that happens or not is not as much of a question as how it happens. There will obviously be some level of adoption of these technologies. And by working with these technologies, especially in this sort of like early phase of their existence, we can have an influence about how they're designed and what these things will look like. This video is more about the sort of economics of these things, but I think it's a good thing to also just kind of consider the different motivations and the different things that come out of this. This is a really long video, which I think is very good, and it's about a lot of other things besides specifically 3D design. But I think it's worth, we'll just watch a little bit at the beginning, and then I think it's worth thinking about what the sort of goals of different 3D platforms are, and how we might either work within those goals or also try to design other types of experience.
Big idea. Let's get AMC to put a theater in Decentraland. What if they not only got into online in a big way, but still kept the spirit of physically going to the theaters and hanging out with friends? They can sell tickets that you can buy using MEA. Users would be able to walk to a pizza kiosk and order a pizza, and then go to theater and hang out with their friends and watch a movie together, all without leaving their house and the game. Edit. It's happening. Someone built a theater. Yo, AMC, where you at? You don't want to miss this opportunity.
Man, when I walked in, it blew my mind. Something was playing. I watched it for at least 5 minutes. Sound and video was clear as fuck. Checked it out and it blew me away. This is absolutely sick. Who owns it? This will be awesome once VR is integrated and you can do screen sharing with a group of friends, so it'll be like watching the movie together. I could even see Decentraland movie gift cards being sold at the supermarket in the area where all those gift cards are located. That'd be so cool. I wish could take all my Bitcoin and live inside this world. Dope ass. Clap, 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 thumbs up, okay, high five, 100, 100.
What you're looking at is Decentraland, conceived by Argentine developers Esteban Ordano and Ari Melik as a virtual reality world for unconstrained markets, and presently advertising itself as a decentralized metaverse owned by its users. In the pitch version, Decentraland is a true virtual space, a whole new parallel world that you access via virtual reality, a world where you can shop, buy things, invest, purchase goods, and go to stores unconstrained by the laws that govern the place where your physical body eats and sleeps, a product so promising that it commands a valuation in the billions of dollars. In practice, it's just a bad video game made up of smaller, worse video games, wrapped in a real estate scheme cosplaying as the Matrix. Most of what Decentraland does, and what it fails to do, are things that would be considered forgivable or quaint in a Kickstarter MMO that had clearly bitten off more than the creators could ever chew, but given that this is a project founded on cryptocurrency, all of those foibles are laced with the language of finance and landlordism. Strolling down Decentraland's spacious boulevards at 5 frames per second rewards the user with a seemingly endless parade of virtual billboards brightly proclaiming that the space you see is all available to rent. This is because of a pretty basic chain of incentives that are laid bare by Decentraland's history. While the nominally playable game launched in February 2020, the actual launch was in 2017, broken into two parts. First, an initial coin offering in August where their MEA token sales raised approximately $24 million denominated in crypto coins, and second, with the terraforming event where parcels of land denominated in land tokens were auctioned off for an additional $28 million in crypto, predominantly bought by guys like this.
I'm not selling it until it's worth at least 10 million.
This being crypto, the obsession with scarcity is
so this goes on obviously for much longer, and it's interesting, but it's not exactly, I think it's just it's good for us to think about when we're designing these spaces, what the existing uses for these things are and how they really influence the way that what we see inside of the spaces. So especially compared to Second Life, which there's a lot of creativity, there's a focus on making art and making scenes for the sake of making scenes. What's interesting about these newer projects is they tend to have these more sort of dystopic financial or commercial incentives behind them. So, we're not making network scenes. We don't obviously have the time or the capacity to make things like this, but we are designing a VR scene for our final project or for this third project. And so we can look at the different ways that VR is being used and think about how we might make scenes either, commenting on that or inspired by that, or of course, completely, other than that. We don't have to, uh, you know, as I said earlier, you guys are completely in control of what you want to create within the scene. But we can think about what kind of spaces we might design to say maybe this would be a good VR space for people to occupy together, or maybe this could be a way that VR would be used in the future, even if it's not a fully functioning application. It could be just a design prototype or proof of concept type thing. Okay, so that's all I have to say about that. That's our networked virtual spaces. I'm going to stop the recording here.